Today I'm going to review with students how to write an AP History essay, and this is from Chapter 13 of the American Pageant on the Age of Jackson. So we're going to start off with the actual question that I modified a little bit from the one that I found on a previous AP History exam. And the reason that I modified it a little bit is so that I could shorten the task a little bit and be a little more specific about how to set up this essay and to help students understand the tasks that are given them in an essay question. And the question today is: the Jacksonian period, 1824 to 1848, has been celebrated as the era of the common man. To what extent did the period live up to its characterization in the terms of economic development and politics? One of the challenges of any AP question is that there are several writing tasks within it. In this essay question, not only is the student being asked to evaluate the common man's achievements or opportunities in the Jacksonian period, the student is also being to talk about two specific categories of issues: economics and politics. So the first thing that a student should do is identify the writing tasks in the question and then begin to think about Jackson's presidency and Van Buren's presidency and what issues and decisions that they made or sponsored in their presidencies that dealt with economics and politics. So we're going to start with those two parts of the question. And so what I do immediately is I take that part of the question, and in the italics I wrote out some of those issues that I know that occurred during Jackson and Van Buren's presidency. The first was the bank war. Another issue was the tariff, the protective tariff, Native Americans, and the spoil system. Those are the four issues that I thought of when I think of economics and politics during the Jacksonian period, and we can write about those issues and we can evaluate them and decide if those actual issues helped the common person or, on the other hand, created more problems for the common person. So let's go forward and flesh out our two subcategories of economics and politics and put underneath the issues that we're going to write about. For underneath economics, we have the bank, including the bank war and the resultant panic of 1837 in the Van Buren presidency, and also the tariff war with South Carolina. Underneath politics, we have the Native Americans, the Indian Removal Act, the movement westward to free up land, and the spoil system. Those are the specific events and issues in those presidencies that we can talk about in the terms of economics and politics. Now we get into pre-writing. Before a student begins to write an essay, he or she should sit down underneath those subcategories, in our case economics and politics, and write about or pre-write what exactly they remember happening during Jackson's presidency regarding economics and, first of all, the bank. And this is a long list of things that occurred, events that occurred during Jackson's presidency and what he did regarding the bank. It also deals with specific effects of Jackson's actions regarding the bank. And if you read down through the list, you will see exactly what happened. Jackson has a personal dislike of the bank. You have to look it up to be able to see exactly what he says, and we have that in our notes. Jackson's methods to kill the bank. He fired several secretaries of the Treasury until he could get that person to stop deposits in the bank. He caused the U.S. Bank to go bankrupt. Then we have pet or wildcat banks who spring up in the South and the West. They go into business. They lend easy, cheap money for land sales. Okay? Money is printed by these banks with little value. There's not much gold or silver that actually gives the money value. It drives up prices because money is now actually worth less than face value. This is what we call inflation. Jackson tries to stop this by declaring all land sales have to be paid for with metal money. This is the specie circular. This has devastating effects on the banks because people will go to the bank to change out their money for gold and silver because they will immediately realize there's a problem with paper money and that it is worthless. Banks run low on money because people are coming to get it. They panic. More people panic. Run to the bank. The bank has to close when it runs out of money. Banks try and call in their loans to prevent closing, but they're unable to get enough money because people have no savings to pay off their loans. Bank failures in England also lead to calling in more loans in America on American bankers. Poor grain harvest makes the situation worse with people raiding grain stores and rioting to get food. All these events happen in the bank war, and these are some of the results of the bank war. This financial policy was hard on common people. It didn't have a stable money supply, a reliable and trustworthy banking system, and lost their entire savings when banks collapsed. Jackson's only answer to the problem was the specie circular, which actually made the situation worse. So in addition to going through the specific factual information of what President Jackson did regarding the banks, you also at the end tell how it affected the common people. And at the very last, you would try to talk about the impact on the future. This is another task in the essay, but it is not written in the question. However, students should think about what are the future effects of what President Jackson did with his financial policy. Very last statement. Poor money policy creates worthless money, inflation, and panic in the markets. This cycle will be repeated many times in U.S. history due to over-speculation first in land, later in railroads, the stock market, and currently the housing market. So that is our very first subcategory, and there's a lot of information that you can talk about, you can explain, you can argue, and then you can tell the results of, and you can evaluate and list future events that will be connected to this event as well. Next we go into the Tariff War. Tariff War starts after the War of 1812 with the American system and the protective tariff, the first to make imports cost more by imposing a tax. People would choose to buy the American product because it's cheaper. The British product will be taxed, or the French product, or the product from the Netherlands. People will not want to buy it. However, there's only one problem. Southerners trade with Britain and other nations a lot. They're subject to higher prices for northern goods due to increase in prices which happen when transporting goods north to south. Southerners thus pay more for all goods, whether they buy from Britain or from the north. South Carolina legislature takes the lead in protesting this tariff. Vice President John C. Calhoun, also from South Carolina, anonymously writes the South Carolina Exposition and Protest, stating states have the right to nullify federal laws or make them illegal. He cites Virginia and Kentucky resolutions and the compact theory of government as support. A lower tariff is meanwhile suggested in 1832 and is passed, but not low enough for South Carolina. They threatened to secede from the Union because of this tariff of abominations, also called the Black Tariff. Henry Clay, the great compromiser in Congress, steps in to author a compromise bill. And meanwhile, President Jackson, instead of getting on board and helping with a compromise bill or doing anything else, sends the army to South Carolina as a show of force to prevent secession. The compromise tariff of 1833 is passed. It promises to lower the tariff by 10% over 8 years. Congress also passes the force bill, though, giving the president the power to use the army to enforce the tariff. Jackson's policies, this is where we switch over. After all that specific factual information and telling the story, you talk about whether or not this policy was beneficial to the common man. How did it benefit him? How did it help him? Jackson's policies did little to support the needs of common people in the South. He He did not work to lower the tariff. Instead, that was accomplished by Henry Clay. Jackson's tariff did, however, help business owners in the North sell their goods. So we have kind of a split situation here. Jackson doesn't tend to help the Southerners very much, and he was a Southerner, so some Southerners took extra offense to that. However, he did help the North. It did help the North with keeping the tariff intact. The future importance of this event is the threat of secession will continue because the problems are not solved with the South and the tariff and trade and their lack of manufacturing. And when the government fails to compromise, war will ensue. Let's switch over to politics, which I like to call giving the people what they want. First, we're going to talk about the subcategory of the Native Americans. Continual population growth and land exhaustion led to more people needing land in the West. Most people in America are still farmers, and they need land. The Louisiana Purchase also led to more Western settlement. Settlers frequently clash with Indians over land. Georgia, specifically, Cherokee natives have developed a settled lifestyle, including a written alphabet by Sequoyah and a written constitution. However, some people still want the natives to move west, and the issue finally ends up in court. In Worcester versus Georgia, the state of Georgia rules that natives must move and would not be recognized as a separate nation. The case moves all the way up to the Supreme Court. Countersuit, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia. The Supreme Court rules in favor of the Cherokee. Jackson's response, the Supreme Court cannot enforce this decision. He decides to go against the Supreme Court's decision. He sponsors the Indian Removal Act, which passes through Congress to move the Indians west of the Mississippi River to lands they will now have by treaty. The 5 civilized tribes, Creek, Choctaw, Cherokee, Seminole, and Chickasaw, about 100,000 are marched for over 100 days to new areas. Over 4,000 died on the journey due to maltreatment, hunger, frostbite, and drowning in river crossings. Land is now readily available to the growing American population of common men who want to become small farmers. So the removal of the Native Americans was a political move to give more land to people who wanted to become small farmers and to free up that western territory acquired through the Louisiana Purchase. Future impact. Don't forget your future impact. The U.S. will continue to break treaties with these natives, move them from lands over and over again, utterly destroying their native way of life and culture. It is a very sad story that is repeated many times by the U.S. government. Spoils system, last political subcategory. After his election, Jackson rewarded political supporters with jobs in government. He believed that any man is as good as another, and sometimes hired people into jobs they had no experience with. Jackson's policies did give common men an equal chance at jobs they may have never gotten if not for the spoils system. So in a way, the spoils system does help the common man get access or opportunities that they would not have had otherwise. However, the policy of not making sure a person was qualified backfired. Samuel Swartout, customs officer in New York, lost $1 million during his tenure. The future importance of the spoils system is that it was adopted by other presidents to reward political supporters. Some presidents, such as U.S. Grant and President Harding, did not learn from Jackson's experiences. They too hired friends into jobs who had little qualification. Both presidents suffered several scandals due to their poor judgment. So now that we have gone all the way through and we have flushed out and come up with information that we can use in our essay, we have the specific factual information. This is the information that we've gone over here on this slide about after the election, the spoils system, how it was used, and the example of Samuel Swartout. This is all specific factual information about the spoils system so the reader understands and knows what it is. Then we tell how it affects the common man. Was it good or bad? And then we talked about future importance. After you've done all that, you're ready to make your assertion and write your essay. This would be my assertion that I had come up with today for this essay. And of course, there's always room for improvement, but this is the one that I created. That answers the question, sets up the essay categories, and introduces to the reader what you're going to tell about whether or not the Jacksonian Democrats helped the common people. Though President Andrew Jackson and his Democrats claim to have created the era of the common man, their policies toward the bank tariff Western lands and political appointments did little to help common people and created serious financial problems. Once you have your assertion, you're ready to start right in with your information about the bank, to tell how it helped the common man, to talk about future impacts. Then the tariff, the same thing, specific factual information, common man, and the impact. And you go all the way through your 4 categories. And in that way, you will have hopefully written a fully developed essay where you have answered all questions and you have performed all the writing and thinking tasks. I hope this helped you all get a better idea of how to write an AP US History essay